On this week's episode of 90 Degrees, we are joined by Hitman, creator for the Hammer Betting Network. Today we're talking about Super Bowl, prop angles, and the NFL draft. Let's dive in to the sharp side and look at the right angles in sports betting. Big bomb bangers, boogie down. Ladies and gentlemen, Jews and Gentiles, sharps and squares. You're now tuned into episode 18 of the 90 Degrees podcast. Now, why is the number 18 significant? Well, if you multiply 18 by 5, you get 90 degrees. Also, 18 in Hebrew is the same letter as luck. So anything divisible by 18 is good luck. So today's guest is our boy Hitman, fellow New Jersey native, prop connoisseur. And what better time of the year for betting props than the Super Bowl? So Hitman, how you feeling today? Are you ready to kick some ass this Super Bowl?
I'm good. It's been a lot of work, a lot of grinding, but ready to go.
So before we dip our toe into the Super Bowl, for those that aren't familiar with your great work, how do you fit into the betting space?
So I'm mostly a prop better, and I mean that's where my biggest edge is. Now I do sides and totals. I do fairly well in them, but prop betting is usually where my expertise is. And there's a difference between a handicapper and a better. Handicapping wise, I give out a service, give out prop picks. I obviously do a bunch of work for the hammer and everything, I'm a pro better that I'm focusing on getting a lot of outs, getting as much as I can on props, which we note down, which I know can be a problem for some people. So the Super Bowl is really my one of my favorite events, probably NFL drafts one and Super Bowls two, just because so many books are willing to take more action on props. There's so many things you could bet on, from the national anthem to the over under, what will a player's first completion, how many yards will it be, any of that type of stuff. So it's for me, again, I'm mostly focusing on props. So Super Bowl time is kind of like mini Christmas. Draft is Christmas, so Super Bowl is mini Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, like the crazy thing with your story as a professional bettor is before professional betting, you were a teacher, I believe a gym teacher. And I always like to highlight that there's people from all walks of life that are sharp sports bettors, or even like sharp, at sports math. Like, um, what is his face? The guy who started Bill James. He was a security guard at a pork and beans factory before he wrote all his books. All right. So the Super Bowl. Um, when do you start, figuring out what angles you're going to hit for it, and who are the market movers?
I have a lot of angles that I've had year to year that these lines tend to open. A lot of these books will copy the lines that they put out from the previous year. They have a chart on what they put out on certain props, and they'll typically just look to copy it. So there's a lot of angles that I tend to be on the same play year to year. One of the most popular that like every sharp knows about is the no safety. That like all the sharps are always playing the no safety at minus 800 or something like that, because the true probability is a lot higher than what the implied minus 800 is. And the public and recreational bettors tend to move that line down. They're looking to play the yes safety, and it tends to drive the price down enough to where sharps are taking the value, which tends to be on the no. So, I mean, that's just one example of some of like the year to year props that typically pros will find themselves on. As far as like the market makers with the props and everything, it used to be the Westgate would have their yearly thing where on a Thursday they would open up the prop lines. It would be like 2,000 a pop, and you go from there. And then a lot of books would look towards the Westgate and copy their lines and everything. Now we're in a little bit of a different time with legalization, where FanDuel and I swear, like FanDuel and DraftKings had props up literally like must have been 30 minutes after the Bengals Chiefs game ended. So it's kind of a new time right now with the props where a lot of these domestic books are just putting out props year round. They're putting up such big menus. So they're used to putting out a lot of this stuff. So it's changed over the years for sure, but there's still a lot of stuff that's repeatable year to year, or at least like semi repeatable year to year. And a lot of times my portfolios look a lot the same. I'm betting on a lot of no's on stuff not to happen, that where the public's betting yes. I'm laying more bigger prices typically than I am taking bigger prices. I tend to lay more of the minus 500s and everything in the Super Bowl because a lot of times that's where the value ends up being.
Yeah, I mean, I swear that every year I've bet the Super Bowl since legalization, I've always taken the no 2 point conversion or under 2.5 passing. Um, sorry, different players attempting a pass. Because in general, I just feel like, okay, I'm sweating the whole game and it's not a big payout, but the odds just don't match up.
Yeah. So you said that you take the over 2.5, right?
The
Oh, the
under,
under. Okay. Yeah. I bet the under more years than not. Not all every year. I know I lost on it in a recent year. Do you remember the recent year that we lost on it?
I'm trying to remember, was it the Chiefs 49ers Super Bowl?
It might have been. It might have been that one. I think it might have been. You're right, but yeah, it's a bet that typically I look to make, and I think this year. I mean, if you're ever going to look for a year where it's like, do you really want to have your quarterback running trick plays where when Jalen Hurts is not 100% and Patrick Mahomes is not 100%? So if there was a year, I know one person was trying to make a case that it was a good year to bet the yes, and he was like, "Oh well, because Nick Sirianni and Andy Reid are creative coaches, and they have 2 weeks to prepare and everything." But no, I was looking at the no again on that prop, and a lot of the reason was based off the injuries with Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes. So I know some shops are offering the no and like the minus or the under 2.5 and like the minus 180ish range. But I was also able to find a lot of shops had the will they complete a pass in like the minus 210 range, and I like that a little bit more. Pay the extra 30 cents and hope that if there is a trick play or something, that it does end up being an incomplete pass. So that's how I personally approach it. But yeah, that's a prop that I typically look at a lot of years also.
I mean, this is certainly a year where you don't want to take over the price from the last year to this year because, both starting quarterbacks, you don't know what's going to happen with their injury. I'm taking the contrarian approach myself, where I just see that um, after 2 weeks of rest, doesn't matter how much hurt they all have, they'll stay in the game. Now, what about those special team props, like punts and field goals, especially exact number? How do you approach those?
So, like, which special teams props and which specific special teams props, like the over under punts, any of
Yeah,
those stuff?
field
Um,
goals, team field goals,
yeah, I
halves.
mean, the thing is there's a little bit less of an edge with it just because a lot of the legal books like FanDuel and DraftKings are pricing a lot of these all year. So they tend to have a good idea of where they should price these props because they're doing it. Um, Now, again, there's always special circumstances, and there is sometimes they'll put up props that like not even these these legal books are putting out during the year. Like for example, like they're putting out like the net yardage of punts and the longest punt, the shortest punt. So you could try to find edges in that because it's something that's typically not put up. One prop that I did bet this year, and this prop's put up like every week at DraftKings typically, but I bet under 7.5 punts around like minus 125. And that was more of like a little bit more of a line shopping where there were some books with seven, some with 6.5. I was trying to find who had the right number. And with the total getting bet up recently to where it's a 51 total right now. Just under 7.5 probably should have been under 7. So I felt like I was getting a free half punt. Essentially, we don't often say that. We usually say get a free half point, but I'm saying no. I felt like I was getting a free half punt on the bet. So yeah, for the special teams props, it's usually not a market that I'm going crazy in, but it's something that if you do the work on it, I'm sure that there is a lot of value to be found. And really, the only value I found was in that punt prop. That's the only special teams related play that I've played so far.
I mean, do you look at correlations between certain props and other bets you like, and try and see like, okay, this is a market that's not correlated to any main market where I have an opinion, so I don't care about hitting this angle, but because of this particular game, I'm worried about the correlation between this and something else I think is going to happen.
Yeah, one thing with like the correlation is like you got to be careful about. There's so many props that correlate to what team's going to win the game. Like I like the Chiefs to win the game, for example. That's a bet that I made, and there's all these props like, oh well, which team will have the first interception? Which team will take the first sack? Which team will have the most yardage? Which team will have the most rushing yardage? All that, and you got to be careful because so many of these props can be correlated that all of a sudden, like if it goes bad to like, and let's say I like the Chiefs and they get blown out, well, in all likelihood, they're gonna maybe have the most penalties and they're gonna have the most turnovers and they're gonna have the least yardage and everything. You're really setting yourself up to be overexposed. So that's one thing. I mean, if you have the bankroll to sustain a disaster, I mean, play the edges, play the stuff that the math is showing that you have an edge. But there's going to be times where you don't have that bankroll, and if you're playing a lot of correlated stuff, you could get wiped out pretty quick in a game where you're betting 7 million correlated props. So it's definitely something to be mindful of.
Well, what are some uncorrelated props that you have found?
Some uncorrelated props, like uncorrelated the uh,
The outcome of the
to
game.
the outcome of the.
Like for example, the passing attempts, in my opinion, is uncorrelated.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, passing attempts it could go either way because like let's say I like the Chiefs. If you bet on like a Jalen Hurts pass attempts over, well, that the reason that he could go over is because they find themselves in a game script where they're behind. So when if they're behind, that favors the Chiefs, obviously, and that's anti-correlated. So that's one example that you could look towards, but uh, um, I'm looking through my list now to see if I could find anything. I would say like something that affects both teams is obviously uncorrelated. Like, will the opening kickoff be a touchback or not? Over under penalties. That's not going to favor one team or the other. The kickoff stuff isn't. Will the last play be a quarterback rush or not? It could be either team that's going to do that. So I mean, you can find a lot of stuff that isn't just all correlated. It's just one bet. There's really no correlations to it. But again, it's something that if you're betting all Kansas City players to go over, and then you bet the Chiefs for the game, and you bet the first turnover will be by Jalen Hurts, then you're setting yourself up to have a lot of exposure towards one type of game script.
I mean, I was just thinking about the correlation because I was in a Barstool Sportsbook betting competition and it involved NFL. So I'm like, oh, great, there's not many games. I'm not a big NFL person. So I just downloaded um, like a NFL game by game statistical log, which showed how many punts, how many field goals, and then from there, and the spread, and then I look at correlations. So I was trying to figure out which props are correlated and which ones aren't, because I had to figure out for which games am I going to take a safe approach and which ones am I going to go with stuff that's correlated, like picking a team to score first and then cover the first half spread. Um, but what I found with the special teams props, like the field goals, is the number of field goals a team kicks to go over or under the prop doesn't correlate with their touchdown number, for example. So that's why in the back of my head I think of, okay, I like the side I like, but I don't want to be too exposed. What are some props I can look into that are not correlated with the game result?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many that you'll be it's easy to find ones that aren't correlated with the game result. That I mean, like I mentioned, there's the ones that about the last play, the rush, the under 2.5 player pass attempts. That's really not correlated with the game result. So, I mean, you're going to do enough shopping that you're going to be able to find stuff that you could get your exposure down on a lot of props without being overexposed towards one side. That's for sure.
Now, do you focus on the result of a drive props, like whether it's live betting or pregame, or is that a market you're not
You
going to
know,
touch?
I do live bet a decent amount, especially I will live bet during standalone games, Monday night football games, Sunday night football games, all that. I'm always looking to live bet. And there's a chance I get involved with some live betting stuff. Like obviously, like if something happens like that San Francisco Eagles game where they're without a quarterback, I was getting involved heavily in live betting in that game. But I'll say this is the one game of the year when the game kicks off. I do so much work in the 2 weeks leading up to it. I just like to fucking. Sorry for
You
cursing
can
on this.
curse.
We'll edit
This
that
is a
out.
cursing encouraged
We'll,
podcast.
we'll, we'll
It's cursing optional but
that,
encouraged.
that you know what's funny? That's the only time that I've ever slept on a podcast and I've said a curse word. So you'll have it on video. You'll have it recorded now for our pod. But yeah, it's the only game of the year that I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna have drinks and I'm gonna have fun. I'm gonna enjoy myself. I worked so hard these weeks. I worked so hard for the year. I'm not going to full out go crazy in live betting. Now, if there's something obvious that happens, like I just mentioned, I'll get involved in live betting. But it's the one game a year where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get ready for the off season. I'm going to enjoy myself.
Now, I doubt this angle still exists as more books are offering live player props, but it was 2 years ago, and I was able to get in a 26-yard passing yards live player prop middle. I forgot on which player, and I was just like
Like
shocked.
one book had like two different books. Like,
One book had 296 and a half, and another book had 275 and
I
a half, and it was the third
rarely,
quarter.
I rarely ever find middles on live player props, and the reason is because so many of the books use the same software provider that gives them like I know FanDuel and DraftKings are always the same, and they use the same provider, where they have the same lines. Sometimes a little different juice, but the same lines. So that is something that, oh man, that's getting the best.
That's what I'm saying.
And
It's one that I found in the past, but I don't think it
and
exists
you know what the
anymore.
best part is? If you could ever do that in live betting, the odds of it middling are so much better because there's so much less game time that you have to deal with. So, like, if you were to get that a 25-yard middle at halftime is way better than a 25-yard middle before the game. So, oh yeah, I gotta find some of those bucks.
I mean, I don't know if that's going to exist this year, but that's why I'm always, scrolling down that live betting menu on the Super Bowl just to see if they got some unusual prop.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure.
And it's hard to even figure out which of those books are even sharp in the live props or not.
Yeah, I mean, I typically am able to differentiate who has the right line and who doesn't, just because I'm so deep into betting, into prop betting all year that like I'm so familiar with like what the numbers should be, what it closed pre-fall, all that stuff, the game state, because I am live betting props a lot. Typically, I'll be able to figure out if there is a difference like that, who's correct. And I never middle just to middle. I always say that I'm looking to play what I think is the right side. I never want to middle, just find who has the right, what's the right number, and then bet that. So that's typically how I look to attack it personally.
Yeah, I mean that's the better way to go is to figure out which of those two market numbers is the best one to bet. Because oftentimes it's like one number is like right and one number is wrong. It's not like both numbers are wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
But certainly if I don't have an opinion on something, that's usually what I'm going to do.
Yeah, if you don't have an opinion, if I can't tell who's the right side or not, then obviously I'll just play it and everything. But like if it was a different sport, like baseball or something, and I didn't have a guy that I could go to ask who's the right side, then I would just probably middle it and be like, I don't know what the right side is. Let me just lock in this plus EV middle. But something like with the live player props, typically I can rely on myself without having to ask other people. I'm like, all right, what's the right side on this?
Now, I don't know if this is necessarily considered a prop, but it's definitely not a main market. For the alternate lines for the Super Bowl, do you think there's any value there, or should bettors flee those markets for the Super
The
Bowl?
opening spread lines or the opening prop?
The alter, the alternate
Oh, the
spreads.
alternate spreads. Yeah, I mean, you're typically not going to find value on it. Maybe back in the day when books weren't pricing this every single week, back in the day when there was just a spread in the total. And then for the Super Bowl, books would put out alternate lines, and that was something they weren't doing all year. Maybe back then you could find value on it, but now a lot of these books, they're pricing these alternate lines all year. So it's something that just because it's a Super Bowl, you're not going to find anything that that is different from any other week.
I mean, I asked because for the GameDay.com where I write, they had me do a Super Bowl simulation from the start of the playoffs. So that went pretty well because my top two best bets were Eagles number one, Chiefs number two. Um, but then the Super Bowl came, so it's like, okay, simulate the game 25,000 times. So from there, I had the alternate lines. But because I had the Eagles as a 1 point favorite and the market's not much different, there wasn't really that much value. There's certainly like a couple edges, but there were like microscopic edges on either -7 Chiefs, plus 288, or Chiefs plus 2.5 at -115. But the edges were so small, they felt like, wow, I did all this work and this is the best I get.
Yeah, and you know what the thing is? It's like you're doing all that work, and but the thing is that the sports books have been doing all that work the whole year, where they're placing alternate lines on every single game, and typically their alternate lines to begin with. There's a lot of hidden vig in those alternate lines where there's a pretty big edge. Like you would have to have a pretty big edge to typically be able to beat those. And I mean, remember, there's no more efficient spread all year typically than the Super Bowl is as well, where that game gets the most attention, it gets the most money bet on the spread. So it typically is the most efficient spread of the entire year. So I don't pay as much attention to the alternates as I should, but I would guess that the alternate lines would probably be pretty efficient at most places.
Yeah, and then most of what I saw when doing the alternates, because in this article I put the break even odds in my from my simulation for every single alternate going, buying or selling points, I think up to 16 points. And most of what I saw are all the bad value bets. So hopefully someone comes across this article and says, I was thinking about this bet, but now I realize
That's
how much worse of a value it is than the
that's the
spread.
best thing that you could do is try to save. A lot of people are. It's just about most people that are betting recreationally, they're probably going to lose. But I mean, the best way that you can put it to people is try to lose less. Try to do stuff that try to avoid some of the needle in the haystack bets and the stuff where there's a lot of hidden house edge, like same game parlays and stuff like that. So that's usually the best advice I give to people. That listen, it's for fun for most people. Most people have normal jobs; they just want to bet a few bucks and have fun. But that's all what I always recommend is if you can try to help people just lose less, then that you did something.
Yeah, and like the other one that I covered was team winning margin. And like the point I had was like these are all pretty bad bets, but there's one bet where it's a negative 0.5% edge. So if you really want to bet it, that's one bet that the edge is just as good as paying perfect basic strategy blackjack. So I don't recommend doing it, but if you do, here's I think it was plus 1300 for 13 to 18 for the Chiefs to win by that much. If you really want a long shot with a small edge, that's it. Otherwise, don't do it.
Yep, that's the perfect way to approach to tell people about it.
And it feels vexing because I love the small market sports. So if I do work on alternate spreads for first, second, third, and fourth quarter European basketball, like the edges on that will be much bigger. Now, obviously, there's issues of getting the money down and not getting banned, and that takes some
Story of
creativity.
my life. Yep.
It's like, but it's like, okay, I found this edge and I did this work, but then a lot of what I find for NFL, Super Bowl, or playoffs, or whatever, is you do all this work and then just doesn't seem worth it. Like it's fun to watch and it's great, and it's certainly the business I work in, but it's just head
That's the
scratching.
thing. Like you could be the best handicapper in the world, but at the end of the day, all that matters is being able to get the money down. If you have nowhere to bet, you have nowhere to get the money down. You can't get the money down. It doesn't matter how good your model is, your handicapping. I mean, the most important thing is getting the money down.
Well, I would say besides getting the money down, if you're a good handicapper, you want to figure out the right angle for your handicap. Like, what is the best way to bet your position?
Exactly.
I would say is a tougher skill.
Yep.
So if you have hundreds of markets that are correlated with the outcome, say, okay, of these markets, which is the best one to
Yeah.
hit?
What has the highest edge? Yep.
Because like the Chiefs' chances of winning if Patrick Mahomes has 350 passing yards, I would say are pretty high. So it's like, okay, if you find a good Pat Mahomes alternate for those alternate player props, maybe that's better. But of course, you have to watch out for the big.
Yeah. And a lot of time, the thing about like, especially if you're doing the same game parlays for the Super Bowl, just remember, like, if you do something with like Mahomes having a certain amount of touchdowns with the Chiefs money line, these books like FanDuel, DraftKings, they are pricing in the correlation into their algorithm. They're not just pricing in, they're overpricing it in all likelihood to where you're paying more than you should be paying on something like that. So that's why typically I just tell people to stay away from stuff like that.
Yeah, the crazy thing with these big game, same game parlays is obviously with so much of the correlation being overbuilt in and being such a bad value. There's occasionally scenarios where I see them offer bonuses for the smaller players or profit boosts where if you put the right things together, the profit boost will negate whatever the house edge is. But of course, you have to have a keen eye.
Yeah, and the stuff about the profit boost too, though, is remember a lot of times typically it's very low limits that you can do that for. So I mean, I recommend people that are betting small and everything. Like if you get those boosts and everything, play them. It's a good bankroll builder. But it's something that you can't always be looking towards doing.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends because I know that there's some professional bettors that listen to my podcast. There's some new bettors, so there's always something for everybody. And of course, that sometimes there's a same game parlay contest where whoever has the highest payout gets a certain prize.
Is there?
Yeah, I mean, Barstool Sportsbook during the season had same game parlay or regular parlay contest where if you're top 50 for $10 minimum parlay, you get $1,000 bonus.
I'll tell you what.
So for that, I was able, it's not big money, but for that, I was able to figure out, okay, what's the winning parlay number?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's when all the weird stuff I bet I just throw it in a parlay for this contest and hope that it look
Yeah,
decent.
it's a good marketing ploy by them. I'll give them credit. I don't like to give these books credit a lot of times, but I'll give them credit on that one.
So, certainly there's always some sort of angle for if you're playing the bonus promo, etc. market. But for the most part, these same game parlays, I think, are one of the biggest threats to sports betting. As we speak, because you're getting these new players to do these bets that have a big payout, and they're more likely to go bust and not be interested in sports betting anymore.
Yeah, and I'll say though the one thing that I'll say about it is, I mean, there are every now and then opportunities where I found like early in the year I had some information that Daryl Henderson was not going to get much work in one specific game. It was for the Rams, and the same game parlay. You can only get so much down on the straight bets, but with the same game parlays, it's a way that you could circumvent the limits to get down more. And you could bet under 59 and a half alternate parlayed with this, under 49 and a half rush yards, under 39, et cetera, et cetera. And there's ways that you could get more money down by doing that. So there are ways to take advantage of it, but generally generally it's something to steer clear of.
Now, like, are there any new type of prop bets for this year's Super Bowl that you've noticed that didn't exist last year?
Just a lot of like player specific stuff, like will Travis Kelsey have a rush attempt? Like you often don't see a tight end having a rush attempt line. um there hasn't been.
Are these ones where they list a no, or they only list the one option of it
No, yeah,
happening?
there's the no. I think the no is like minus 800 if I remember correctly. But a lot of it's the same stuff. Will a quarterback have a reception? Like just a lot of similar stuff that I've been seeing. So, but you know what? We're still far out. Yeah, there's probably a lot of books are going to get creative and they're going to start putting out probably new stuff that we're not accustomed to seeing. I would guess there'll be some cool stuff, but from what I've seen so far, a lot of these books have like the generic. All right, this is what we offer every Super Bowl, and I'm sure as the week goes on, closer to game time, is when they'll try to get a little more handle and put up some of these newer, more creative markets.
Now, once everything is said and done, when the ball kicks off on Super Bowl Sunday, how many bets do you think you're going to have down on the game?
Over 100. Over 100. It'll be a lot. That's typically, I think my go-to number is usually like 100 to 130. I'll probably have. So it's a lot, but I mean, it's not a lot when you have a lot of outs and you have a ton of different paperhead skins to bet into, and then there's all the legal outs all over and everything. And when you really break it down like that, it's only like three or four bets each different legal out or paper, any of that. So it's not as crazy when you break it down that way. But yeah, it's probably going to be.
I mean, I don't think it's crazy at all, but
Yeah.
I just bring it up because people will be like, all right, you spent all this time researching, and how many bets are you putting in?
Yeah, I mean, it really it depends. It really depends, like for each person, how many outs do you have? Because you're going to find so many different line sets, and when you're finding different lines, you find the discrepancies, find what you think the right side is or not. So that's where I'm having a lot. A lot of my plays that I have for the Super Bowl is like, oh, this one specific book has this play, when no other books have it. It's not a widely available play. So that's typically what I'm tending to. A lot of my portfolio has.
Now, with the Super Bowl coming up, are you spending less time on the other sports you focus on, or are you able to balance it out better because
I
you have a
only
2 week
originate
runway?
I only originate the NFL. Now I bet every other sport, but it's either I'm betting news, I'm betting off market lines, I have guys that specialize in those other sports that trade me information and everything. So that's really all I'm doing for those sports. So really the other sports aren't affected much, to be honest, because it's not really, I'm not originating or handicapping anything in other sports. It's just getting the money down and betting on this stuff. So not really a big difference for me. And my handicapping and all that fully focused on all the Super Bowl stuff for the next 2 weeks.
Now, what time in the football season do you start preparing for Super Bowl props? Is it right before the Super Bowl odds are
Yeah,
posted? Are you looking at certain things months in
no,
advance?
it's on Monday, probably Monday after the conference championships, and they're starting to get posted now that early. So Sunday I'm focusing on last minute stuff in the conference championship game, and then even maybe as early as Sunday night, that's when it's get ready. And it's easy to work really hard when like, all right, just get through this game and then I'm done until like July, So that makes it easy to just grind and go crazy during these 2 weeks, is because there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
So once that light at the end of the tunnel is done, you start preparing for the next football season, or do you take a little sports betting
Yeah,
vacation?
I mean, I'm always betting, but again, it's a lot easier to bet when you're not originating and you just got to worry about getting bets in and everything. You're not doing the handicapping work. It saves a ton of time. But then, once more NFL lines get posted, get back into the thick of things. The regular season wins, the NFL draft, which I love, the season long player props, all that stuff starts to come out, and then you start getting back. And the week one lines, the look ahead lines, all that stuff starts coming out. You start getting back in the thick of things. But it's definitely a significantly amount of less work during the NFL offseason. I mean, and then when the season comes around, it's 5, 6 months of just crazy grinding, not much free time. But then during those 6 months, it's back to, you have a life a little bit, and you're still working, but it's a lot it's a lot more, less time consuming.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Now, NFL draft, how do you approach that? Because you can't exactly look at some stats and be like, okay, I think this is going to
It's the
happen.
biggest edge, at least for me. It's just following the mock drafts, following the reporters, following the draft guys, reacting to news before books can adjust to the news. There's information that gets passed along in the draft, typically on who the teams like, who they don't like, what positions they're targeting, all that good stuff. So it's my favorite market, but I'm getting a little bit more worried year to year that books are not going to be taking as much action in the draft because books tend to not do well in the draft. It's an event that the bettors tend to usually get the best of it. So a little worried about the long term viability of the draft, but something that that's my favorite event of the year to grind.
And how do you figure out when teams are doing a head fake to the rest of the world?
I mean, it's a lot. You can never tell for sure, but you got to play the percentages behind it. You can kind of, when you hear certain information, you can kind of say to yourself, this makes logical sense to me. You can kind of get a portfolio on teams, what teams tend to be a little more honest with reports, what teams tend to always lie, what reporters tend to have a good feeling about certain teams. They tend to have good information on those teams in years past. It's tough to describe how you do it, but you kind of just got to have a feel for it through experience, to be honest, where you're doing it so many years. You tend to just have a feel on what information is correct, what isn't. And that's not to say that I don't get duped. I get duped plenty of times, but the name of the game is that you're right more than you're wrong. You're going to be wrong, but the draft is an event. If you do your work, you should. Most sharp guys I know will be right more often than they're wrong in that event.
I mean, my favorite NFL draft story, betting wise, is when Doug Kazarian read the actual fine print on a bet and an MGM prop. I forgot exactly what it was, but a player that was a defined as a cornerback, but was really a safety. And then he like jammed the machine for a lot of money, and they made a ton. Like, I mean, I guess there's a lot of stuff where
You know
it's like
what?
reading the
You know what
rules.
kills me about that story is I knew about that bet. I knew about that bet at that specific sports book. And I was in the process of trying to get down on it. And then the odds got pulled and everything. And obviously, I presume that it was him that hit it 700 times and got the odds pulled. And he beat me to it. So credit to him. I probably would have made some nice money on it. But yeah, that's an example of sometimes where you could find an edge.
Yeah, and he was at Bet Bash too, and he's a good ass dude. But it's just, I like the fact that he has the daily wager or bet, whatever they call it on ESPN these days, and he's actually a practitioner of what he's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people like in the content business that they talk about this stuff on Daily Wager or something like that, but they're not really in the thick of things. So it is refreshing to have people that are in the thick of things and they're betting their own money, they're betting good amounts. So that's definitely a story that I relate to. Is and maybe I've had a few of those moments as well that's similar to what he's had, and it's always good when you can get a big score like that off of something like that.
Yeah, and I'm also curious of what happens at the gaming commission for when legal sports books try and stiff betters or other shenanigans for some of these odds.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of these places are going to do whatever they can to do that. So,
But luckily, if somebody files a complaint, it's a public record,
yeah, and but
so you can dig it
the thing
up.
with the gaming commission too is they tend to lean towards the books a lot of times. So you kind of have a really compelling case to be able to beat the books and stuff like that.
I mean, that would be a hell of a 90 degrees angle episode if I just do public records requests for all the gaming commission decisions and like analyze them.
I'm sure you'll be favoring with the betters more than they are.
I mean, I just look at what the actual documentation says because I was looking at the New Jersey Division of Gaming Control. I forgot the exact NJDGE, Gaming Enforcement, and I was looking at their complaint form if someone wants to file a complaint, and they have to have attachments of customer service chats and other ways they've tried to resolve it. So I'd be, that's all public record. So I'm interested in, considering what isn't redacted, looking to see, okay, what was the documentation?
Yeah, yeah,
What made it get to that point and what was the decision?
yeah, for sure.
Because I'm guessing most of the time, if the book actually screws up, the book will settle it before it gets to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some issues as well, and it never got to the point. Although it was like a half dozen customer service complaints and having to contact higher ups to try to resolve stuff. Fortunately, all my stuff has been resolved, but not without it being a giant pain in the ass.
Yeah, and I noticed like a lot of the time, I think I got clever and they didn't pay me out, and it turns out I look at the house rules and it's like, okay, I got played, and it's on me.
Yep, yep.
All right, do you have any last advice for betters for the upcoming Super Bowl and for future Super Bowls?
Tend to avoid the needle in the haystack bets. And on public bets, if you like the public side, for example, like Patrick Mahomes over pass yards is a public side where recreational bettors are going to be looking to play that stuff early. And if you like the other side, or you like the nose on stuff, tend to play that late. That's probably one of the best pieces of advice I could give for the Super Bowl because that's how you're going to get the best of the number. And then the other probably best piece of advice that I could give for the Super Bowl is have a lot of outs because with a lot of these props, when there's hundreds and hundreds of menu options, you should be able to find discrepancies between two different books. So that's probably the two best pieces of Super Bowl advice that I could give people.
All right, Hitman, thanks for coming on 90 Degrees this week.
Appreciate you for having me. Thank you very much, and good luck in the Super Bowl.
Big bomb bangers. Thank you for tuning in to 90 Degrees, presented by the Hammer Betting Network. Head over to our website, thehammer.bet, for all your sports betting needs. If you enjoyed the show, click that like button. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. If you made it this far, drop a comment on your favorite Super Bowl prop betting angle. Let's cash.